Hi everyone. Late one night at a routine highway inspection in the United States, an ordinary cargo check turned into an incident that never appeared in official reports. This video is meant for slow, immersive listening, letting you settle into a tense atmosphere built on observations, fragments, and unanswered questions rather than clear explanations. Late at night, a joint inspection checkpoint on Interstate 95 felt endless. Freight trucks idled in a slow line, engines humming while diesel fumes settled into the small control booth. Compliance Officer Andrew Bell had been nursing the same cup of cold coffee for hours, crossing license numbers out in a handwritten logbook and waiting for the shift to end. The highway ran north to south, carrying cargo from ports, distribution hubs, and border crossings deeper into the country. This section of the interstate operated under a streamlined inspection system, but random checks were still mandatory, especially during overnight shifts. The radio crackled now and then with routine alerts, mostly about undeclared alcohol, cigarette shipments, or mislabeled auto parts. It was all painfully familiar. Bell knew that some freight moved under special handling lists, and experience had taught him not to look too closely at cargo that came with too much paperwork and too little explanation. That night, he fully expected to sit there until sunrise without incident. Just before dawn, a new notice came through an internal channel. Inspectors were advised to expect a refrigerated truck registered to a logistics carrier based in Eastern Europe, routed through several transfer hubs before entering the United States. According to the accompanying documents, the trailer was carrying blood processing biomaterials for a major pharmaceutical company with offices in New York. On paper, everything looked legitimate, but the route included too many detours, and the timing did not line up with standard medical logistics. Bell frowned, reviewed the notice again, and wrote down the trailer number, deciding at least to examine the documents carefully. He had no way of knowing that this small decision would quietly bind his life to something no one seemed eager to acknowledge. When the truck finally rolled out of the darkness into the inspection lane, the first things Bell noticed were the fresh paint on the cab and the spotless trailer, free of dents or road wear. The driver stepped down with a tight, practiced smile, holding a phone with a translation app running. A calm female voice repeated that all documents were in order. The cargo was extremely important, and delays were undesirable. The temperature gauge on the trailer showed a steady sub-zero reading, exactly as required. Bell took the folder, scanned the manifests, and for the first time in a long while, felt a familiar professional unease. Nothing was openly wrong, yet something refused to line up. Instead of stamping the clearance and moving on, Bell initiated an extended inspection. He activated his body camera and requested a duty medical officer and a veterinary inspector, a standard procedure for biological materials. The seal on the rear doors looked brand new, but its serial number differed from the paperwork by a single digit, the kind of mistake made when someone rushes or swaps components. Bell noted it in his notebook and signaled the mechanic to break the seal on camera. The metal doors opened with a heavy creak, and cold air spilled out, carrying the sharp scent of disinfectant and metal. Inside the trailer, pallets of containers were stacked in neat rows, filled with bags of blood and plasma, all labeled in multiple languages. Each crate bore the logo of a pharmaceutical company frequently mentioned in industry news. None of this was illegal, but the volume seemed excessive for a single recipient. At the far end of the trailer, pressed against the wall, stood another object. It was a large metal container with no labels, strapped down with heavy restraints and secured by several locks. A portable thermal scanner flickered as it passed over the area. Against the uniform cold of the trailer, one spot glowed warmer, as if heat were being generated inside the unmarked container. The medical officer muttered that it was probably a sensor error, but Bell asked for another scan. The result was the same: localized warmth coming from within the container. Bell radioed for permission to open the disputed unit, citing the need to rule out sanitary risks. After a brief pause, a tired voice from the duty supervisor responded, instructing them to proceed according to protocol, fully on record. It was a familiar phrase, one that quietly shifted responsibility away from offices and onto whoever happened to be standing closest. The restraints were removed, the locks broken with a sledgehammer, and the lid was lifted slowly, as if pressure might escape. Inside, on a metal platform, lay a man. He was covered with a thin sheet, transparent tubing running from his arms into ports along the container wall. His skin was unnaturally pale and unmarked, smooth like a display model. Beneath the sheet, his build was clearly defined, the kind of muscle structure seen in people who train constantly. The medical officer checked his neck. There was no pulse. A mirror held to his mouth remained clear. A cardiac monitor traced a flat line. Yet the man's eyes were open, fixed directly on those leaning over him. There was no familiar human response in that stare. He did not blink or shift his gaze. He did not try to speak. He watched the inspectors the way observers are watched, calmly and without emotion. Bell felt an immediate, unsettling impression that there was no fear or plea in those eyes, only assessment, as if each person present were being measured as a potential subject. The medical officer quietly stated that by all criteria, they were looking at a clinical corpse, then hesitated, adding that the skin and muscle condition did not match that of any deceased body he had ever examined. One of the guards muttered an old, half-forgotten word under his breath, then stopped when Bell shot him a sharp look. While temperatures were recorded and photographs taken, the truck driver stepped aside and, turning his back to the cameras, made a phone call. He spoke in Romanian, his tone strangely calm, as if reporting a routine delay. Bell caught only fragments through the translator later. The container had been opened. The subject remained stable. About an hour after that call, a black sedan arrived at the checkpoint. Two men stepped out, both wearing expensive coats. One introduced himself as a regional coordinator for the receiving company. His credentials were flawless, the seals familiar, his manner that of someone accustomed to resolving matters without paperwork. Calls from above followed quickly. First from a regional oversight office, where Bell was gently reminded that the shipment was part of a sensitive medical project, and delays were strongly discouraged. Then from farther up the chain, where the tone hardened and references were made to international cooperation and restricted channels. Bell was asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement with the explanation that the public should not be exposed to material science had not yet learned to explain. He was offered a transfer to a quieter position if he refrained from complicating matters with unnecessary detail. In the end, the container was sealed again, fitted with domestic inspection tags. Portions of the inspection record were removed for reconciliation, and the truck continued south as if nothing had happened. Several months later, Bell saw the same pharmaceutical logo on a business news program. The segment announced the launch of an international research center in the United States, focused on blood science and tissue regeneration. A company spokesperson spoke about breakthroughs in treating severe conditions and thanked various partners for their support. Among the logos scrolling on the screen was one from an agency responsible for biological material oversight. the same office that had called him that night. Bell felt a dull tightening in his stomach. What had once been described as an experimental shipment now fit neatly into an official narrative. Around the same time, local reports began to mention odd incidents. Several residents of a nearby city died suddenly of cardiac arrest, despite having shown no prior health issues. Medical notes described internal organs as unusually well preserved. In some cases, blood remained fluid longer than expected. These details were scattered across unrelated documents, and taken individually, they suggested nothing more than tragic coincidence. But Bell, unable to shake old habits, sensed a common tone to these deaths, something too orderly, as if the bodies resisted acknowledging death itself. Of the people who had been on duty that night, 2 died within a year. One crashed on a straight stretch of highway in daylight, with no oncoming traffic and dry pavement. The other suffocated in his garage after a sudden fire, neighbors later saying they had seen lights on and heard music moments before. Both cases were ruled accidents, with no criminal findings. Bell did not believe in that kind of coincidence, but every attempt to raise questions with former colleagues ended the same way. Conversations cut short or redirected to mundane topics. A few years later, Bell left the service, citing health and exhaustion. He moved to New York City, took a security job in a large office complex, and tried to keep his life as quiet as possible. In the noise of the city, the memory of the refrigerated truck sometimes felt unreal, like a nightmare the mind revisits during insomnia. But some nights, he saw it again. The cold metal container, the unmoving body, the eyes devoid of anything human. On those nights, he woke with the feeling that someone was standing at the edge of his bed, studying him closely. No official trace of the incident remained. Attempts to locate the old inspection record in archival systems led only to neatly cleaned entries. The shift log for that date looked as if the checkpoint had not operated at all. A flash drive Bell had secretly kept, containing part of his body camera footage, slowly degraded over time. Most of the video was corrupted, but one short sequence still played clearly. He never showed it to anyone, understanding that doing so would likely end whatever peace he had left. One evening, riding the subway home on the circular line, Bell found himself studying passengers out of habit. The ride felt ordinary. Damp coats, tired faces, fingers scrolling through phones. He nearly drifted off when his gaze caught on the figure seated across from him. The man wore a dark coat and had smooth, almost luminous skin and dark, steady eyes. Something about his features felt disturbingly familiar, like an older version of a face seen long ago on a screen. At first, Bell told himself it was coincidence. People resemble one another. The mind fills in gaps when it searches for patterns. But the longer he looked, the clearer the details became. The line of the jaw, the straight bridge of the nose, a slight asymmetry of the lips. All of it matched the man from the container, the one they had declared dead. The stranger met his gaze without blinking, as if recognizing him, yet not quite acknowledging him as an equal. There was no curiosity or recognition in his eyes, only the same level attention one gives an object under observation. The train entered a poorly lit tunnel, the carriage lights flickering briefly. In those moments, the stranger's face seemed to change, not dramatically, but enough to unsettle. His skin appeared almost translucent for a second, thin dark lines visible beneath it, too even and deliberate to be natural veins. His neck showed no creases, no trace of age. Bell noticed a narrow metal band on his wrist. Along its inner surface ran a sequence of tiny numbers. In the dim light, Bell recognized the final digits. They matched the designation once written in his file under the words "Special Unit." When the train slowed, passengers stood, blocking the view. Bell pushed through the crowd, but on the platform there was no sign of the man. He had vanished among pillars and advertisements without leaving a silhouette or a sound. Standing there, Bell caught a familiar scent. Cold metal mixed with something antiseptic. The same smell that had rushed out when the trailer doors were opened. It had no place in a subway station, yet it lingered. The next morning, his phone rang before he finished his tea. The number was hidden, displaying only zeros. A male voice, fluent and calm, asked about his health and reminded him of a document he had once signed regarding non-disclosure and cooperation with international medical partners. The voice made no threats. It simply noted that some matters were best left untouched for the well-being of oneself and others. When Bell tried to ask a question, the call ended, as if it had been timed to the second. Days later, a news clip appeared in his feed. The same pharmaceutical company was opening a new research center in New York, dedicated to longevity studies. Officials spoke. Scientists smiled. Glass buildings reflected sunlight. In one wide shot, deep in the background, a dark-suited figure stood near a column. The face remained in shadow, but Bell recognized the posture and the slight turn of the head. He muted the sound and closed the laptop before the segment ended. Since then, he has lived more carefully, but the sense that someone nearby does not breathe in the cold or age with the years has never left him. Officially, there was never a refrigerated truck carrying something inhuman. There are only clean records, perfect reports, and a successful medical project. But the memory of the cold container, the motionless body with a predator's eyes, and the man on the subway is too precise to dismiss. Bell remains one of the few who knows that something crossed an inspection point years ago, something for which human bodies are merely cargo, and for which time and age do not carry the meaning they do for everyone else.